Okay, in this video we're going to be looking at the poem Harmonium by Simon Armitage. So a bit of background first. Armitage is originally from Marsden, which is mentioned in this poem, in West Yorkshire. He moved to Portsmouth to study for his degree and then returned to Marsden later and lives there now. So for Armitage, this idea of home is quite important. As a young boy, he was a choir boy at Marsden Church, and his father also had links with the church, using it as a venue for his musical productions. In this poem, he sort of explores a relationship with his father, so we've got a parental-child relationship, which we can, if we're thinking about what poems we would compare this to, those sorts of poems would probably be good links. And he writes quite often about this relationship with he and his father. So, we will read first and then go through it line by line. So, Harmonium. The Farron Chapelette was gathering dust in the shadowy porch of Marsden Church, and was due to be bundled off to the skip, or was mine, for a song, if I wanted it. Sunlight, through stained glass which day to day could beatify saints and raise the dead, had aged the harmonium's softwood case, and yellowed the fingernails of its keys, and one of its notes had lost its tongue, and holes were worn in both the treadles where the organist's feet, in grey woollen socks and leather-soled shoes, had pedalled and pedalled. But its hummed harmonic still struck a chord. For 100 years that organ had stood by the choristers' stalls where father and son, each in their time, had opened their throats, and gilded finches, like high notes, had streamed out. Through his own blue cloud of tobacco smog, with smoker's fingers and dotted thumbs, he comes to help me cart it away, and we carry it flat, laid on its back. And he, being him, can't help but say that the next box I'll shoulder through this nave will bear the freight of his own dead weight. And I, being me, then mouth in reply some shallow or sorry phrase or word, too starved of breath to make itself heard. Okay. So it's a really quite a complex poem. It's simple in its subject matter, but kind of complex in the emotions that it explores. So let's start off by having a look at this title. So a harmonium, so it's a kind of instrument, and it's the instrument that's kind of the subject of the poem, so the instrument that he and his father are carrying out of the church. On a sort of basic level, that's what it is, it's an instrument, but on a kind of deeper level, we've got this idea of harmony. Now, harmony suggests a kind of connection, a beauty of the relationship between one note and another, and a kind of musical quality. So altogether very, very positive, but it is an old instrument, kind of not archaic, but it's definitely old-fashioned instrument, so that's perhaps its negative connotation there. It's this harmony, connection, beauty, musical quality, but also it's old, so we're wondering where the poet's going to go with that. So the Farron Chapelette was gathering dust. This is the name of the harmonium. Now, gathering dust, we're going to find quite frequently we've got little cliches and colloquialisms. And often they kind of serve almost as a mask for exploring true feelings. They add a kind of element of light-heartedness to the poem. It lacks formality, and perhaps that's to do with this idea of the poet needing a mask to hide his true feelings. So it's gathering dust, so it's kind of been neglected, not played for a while. Okay, in the shadowy porch of Marsden Church, again this idea of it being kind of not in the limelight. It's had its day. It was once very important and not anymore, past its prime. Of Marsden Church, you know, that's the church where he used to be a choir boy, where he grew up. And was due to be bundled off to the skip. Here, a colloquialism, bundled off to the skip. Quite a harsh image. quite impersonal. It doesn't suggest a connection between the speaker and this instrument. But we already know that there probably is going to be a connection because he's writing a poem about it. So he must have some form of connection to this harmonium, but we've just got these little colloquialisms that maybe act as a mask for the real connection that the poet has and the real meaning that the poet ascribes to the harmonium. Or was mine for a song if I wanted it. This song here is going to link to a theme of music running throughout. Sunlight through stained glass, which day to day it could beatify saints and raise the dead, had aged the harmonium's softwood case and yellowed the fingernails of its keys. So sunlight, day to day, we've got the idea of a passing of time here. Something that can beatify saints and raise the dead. So actually, in many ways, especially in a church context, a very powerful presence. However, with the harmonium, it's aged the harmonium. Yellowed the fingernails of its keys. And one of the notes had lost its tongue. Now we're starting to notice here in this stanza personification of the harmonium. It aged its case, it yellowed the fingernails of its keys. One of the notes had lost its tongue. Now this is really, really important because we're going to note later that the poet is actually drawing a connection between the harmonium and his father. So this personification of the harmonium here is a hint that the harmonium is more than just an instrument to him. Now, if we have a look at the yellowed the fingernails of its keys, commonly smokers have sort of yellowed fingers due to the smoking habit, and we're going to note later, you've probably noticed it in the first reading, they're talking about the father's smoker's fingers. Here, just like the father, the sunlight here and the weathering, aging of the sunlight and time is kind of just like the father is growing old, the harmonium is growing old with him in a very similar way, kind of mirroring his aging. One of the notes had lost its tongue. Now we're going to, again later, this idea of kind of losing your voice or difficulty of expression, that's going to be drawn again later, so we need to make sure we remember that. And obviously, you know, it's a harmonium, so its purpose is kind of, it's not as good at what it should be. It's not as good at doing what it should do. It's lost its tongue. And holes were worn in both the treadles where the organist's feet in grey woolen socks and leather-soled shoes had pedalled and pedalled. So this repetition of pedalled here suggests kind of hard work. That this harmonium's job hasn't been easy. It's had a very long and very difficult life. Now, its hummed harmonics still struck a chord. For 100 years that organ had stood by the chorister's stalls, where father and son each in their time had opened their throats and gilded finches like high notes had streamed out. Okay. So if we have a look here, if something strikes a chord, again it's a colloquialism. If something strikes a chord with you, it kind of makes you think of a connection with something. So the hummed harmonics still kind of rouse feeling in the speaker. And obviously, not only is that the colloquialism for rousing a feeling, but it's also this kind of connection to music and sound. That it's still, although it's not as good as what it used to be, it's still able to make that music. For 100 years that organ had stood by the chorister's stalls, where father and son, now father and son here a general mention of fathers and sons, but it does highlight his own shared past with his father. Maybe he's afraid of saying where my father and I. Perhaps that's sort of too strong for him, and he'd rather be quite general. But it's obvious to us that this is going to be, especially on a second reading, that this is going to be relating to he and his dad. Each in their time had opened their throats, and gilded finches like high notes had streamed out. Now, open their throats, we've got a kind of ease of musicality here. And the father and the son are kind of brought together by this musicality. Gilded finches, like high notes, had streamed out. Now, this is quite important. This is a simile, but it's a reversed simile, because it's not saying high notes like gilded finches. It's gilded finches like high notes. So it maybe is suggesting that the singing is more beautiful than the simile itself. So it was almost not enough for Armitage to say the high notes streamed out like gilded finches. The idea of them being gilded finches, we know finches are birds, the idea of them being gilded finches came before the idea of them being high notes, almost elevating their beauty. So the simile cannot capture the beauty in its normal state, so it's reversed to kind of bring this to the forefront. Through his own blue cloud of tobacco smog. Now, this idea of seeing something through something else, it's a link to that stained glass image from earlier. But here it's a lot more kind of normal. A blue cloud of tobacco smog. It's not negative, I wouldn't say. It's definitely quite a comforting image. This idea that wherever the dad went, the smoke came with him. It's something that the speaker would be used to. With smoker's fingers and dottled thumbs, he comes to help me cart it away. So here we've got the smoker's fingers linked to earlier, and dottled thumbs, this idea of hard work. Just like the treadles have holes worn in them, his thumbs are dottled. He comes to help me cart it away. Now we've got this he, his, he. Who is it? We know it's his dad, but he's not saying it's his dad. So again, it's this idea of reticence, of him kind of being afraid of truly expressing his feelings about this and trying to keep some distance through this kind of extended metaphor. Cart it away, colloquial. Suggests a kind of heavy load, but nothing special. We carry it flat, laid on its back. This internal rhyme here, the internal rhyme is quite sort of damning almost. Reiterates the fact that this harmonium is no longer standing upright, it's useless, it's flat, it's on its back. And he, being him, can't help but say that the next box I'll shoulder through this nave will bear the freight of his own dead weight. So this is the father, he being him can't help but say, so his father has a voice here. The next box I'll shoulder through this nave. Now when you shoulder something, you kind of, you have to withstand it. It suggests difficulty, not ease, difficulty. shoulder through this nave will bear the freight of his own dead weight. Now, dead weight, very harsh. Dead weight suggests something useless, colloquial again, but perhaps it is a kind of hidden beneath that is Armitage's admittance, that his dad will be dead, and that he'll have to carry this weight. The rhyme of the freight and the weight kind of brings his struggle into focus. And I being me, so here we've got a mirroring here, he being him, I being me. A mirroring of what's said earlier, and it kind of draws this connection between father and son. Then mouth in reply. So actually the words aren't coming out, he's mouthing the words. Some shallow or sorry phrase or word, too starved of breath to make itself heard. So where his father is able to kind of articulate himself and use this rhyme, the freight of his own dead weight, it's kind of this harsh, forceful rhyme, the son isn't able to make himself heard. It's not as strong and harsh. We've got the sibilants, some shallow or sorry phrase or word, too starved of breath to make itself heard. Sibilants. Now, if we were to equate a sound with sibilants or a voice, we would think of whispering. Perhaps Armitage can't bring himself to speak. And then this couplet of word and heard, a kind of regretful tone. And the couplets always add a sense of finality. So the idea that, will Armitage ever be able to express to his father what he wants to express? So we've got this idea in the poem of Armitage kind of struggling with his father's age and the distance relationship between he and his father, in the same way that they are struggling to kind of remove the harmonium with all of the memories and the joy that it gave them in its time. It just can't give them that joy anymore, so they're kind of removing it from the church. But like his father, his relationship with his father has altered with age as well. So he really wants his father to remain a part of his life, but he's struggling with the idea that one day he will have to sort of bundle him to the skip, as it were, just like the harmonium. He expresses regret at his father's vulnerability, so the idea of the tobacco smoke and the smoker's fingers and the dotter's thumbs, but he's also reminded of the sort of strength and creativity of his past. He wants his father to remain a part of his life. And then also, because of the fact that we've got this ending here, perhaps that's regret that he wasn't able to express that to his father, that they kind of communicated in these colloquialisms and hid the true meaning of their feelings, and Armitage was never really truly able to express the regret for not being able to speak properly.